Welcome to Sacred Synergy, where we feature conversations at the heart of evolution. Today's guest is Ilia Delio. Ilia is a Franciscan Sister of Washington, D.C., and she is a prominent theologian, author, and speaker on Teilhard de Chardin and the themes of religion and science. She currently holds the Josephine C. Connelly Endowed Chair of Theology at Villanova University, and she has doctorates in pharmacology and historical theology. Ilia is the author of over 22 books. I say over because she's going to talk about her most recent upcoming book today. And those books have been translated into Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Polish, and German. She is the founder of the Center for Christogenesis, and Ilia lectures nationally and internationally on topics including evolution, artificial intelligence, consciousness, culture, and religion. As Ilia mentions during our conversation, she and I have crossed paths professionally over the years, and we share a number of the same scholarly interests. Her writing has often served as a great primer for my own thoughts. I find that she takes a liberty of speculating on a topic that really hasn't been addressed, at least not within the last couple hundred years, and she's able to approach that in a more contemporary way. It has been a pleasure to be able to get to talk with her and to know her a bit more on a personal level recently. Before we begin our conversation, I want to briefly mention that the American Teilhard Association is going to be having its annual retreat at Daylesford Abbey in Paoli, Pennsylvania from May 29th through May 31st, 2026. The theme of this year's retreat is Reimagining a Universe in the Making, Teilhard and Process Theology, and it features Don Viney as the plenary speaker. You can go to teilharddechardin.org for more information. And the Abbey, Daylesford Abbey, is a beautiful place to make a personal, private, or to schedule to host a group retreat. The Abbey is home of a Norbertine community of priests, and it features a retreat center that rests on over 80 beautiful acres of Chester County countryside here in Pennsylvania. You can visit daylesford.org for more information. And finally, I am very excited to announce that my upcoming book, titled Sacred Synergy, Spiritual and Psychological Growth in an Evolving World, will be released on May 5th with Paulus Press. So I am very excited for the upcoming release, and I will have more information as we get closer to that date. But I just wanted to get it out there now as I am anticipating that release, and I hope that that book nourishes you in some way along your journey. So I very much appreciate Ilia's time and her sharing of her personal journey, as well as the deep insight, along with the levity that she added to this conversation. Our prayer is that you also find our time together life-giving. Ilia, thank you so much for joining us on the Sacred Synergy podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. It's great to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. I don't know how much of an introduction you need for the majority of our audience here. I'm sure they are quite familiar, at least in some capacity, with your work. However, could you please introduce yourself for the community and share a little bit about what you do with your time in the world?
Well, so I am a theologian who teaches at Villanova University in the area of systematic constructive theology. So I do courses on process theology and Teilhard, etc. I also run the Center for Christogenesis. No, I don't run it. I actually founded it, and now have a small team that, wonderfully spearheads it. But the center is really devoted to bridging science, religion, and culture, building on the insights of Teilhard de Chardin, and just kind of helping us navigate our way in this very complex world. Do a lot of traveling and speaking and writing. I just finished another book called The Christian Mutation, The Dynamic God of Jesus in a World of Becoming. So I'm still probing those questions like, what is the one God? What is God? How is God active and alive in our world today? So I'm a Franciscan sister, so a lot of what I do really is driven by my devotion, I guess, to Francis of Assisi and that finding God in the world, and very incarnational focus. So a lot of my work from the beginning on has always had a very strong Christocentrism, or kind of a centrality of divine love at the heart of everything that exists. So I guess that's about it, Andrew, in a nutshell. Other than that, I just write and speak and write and speak and speak and write.
Yeah, see, that's why I asked, what do you do with most of your time in the world? Because if I say, what do you do for a living or what do you do for work? You'll be, oh, I write, I speak, I teach. But your writing and speaking and teaching is at a much deeper level than that. So I'm glad you were able to put that in your own words.
Thanks.
Yeah, initially I became familiar with your work when I was in my graduate program and I was doing some work on first Francis and then eventually Bonaventure. I remember the book you wrote, Simply Bonaventure, was very helpful for me as I was unpacking his thought. And then I come across this guy, Teilhard. I come across your work that touches on Teilhard. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just great here because here's this theologian who is able to put things in a very systematic way that I am able to, my brain is able to understand. And now she is approaching this really deep thinker who touches on so many things that we would never think theology and spirituality might be relevant to in some way.
Right. Yeah, it's been great to see your own career develop. And I remember you as a student at LaSalle. And so wonderful that we have overlapping interest, in Franciscan theology and Teilhard. I think Teilhard was a closet Franciscan, by the way.
Okay. What makes you say that? His relationship with the earth or
Yes, I think I don't think he knew enough Franciscans to really, to join them. So I think he was just, immersed in the Jesuit world for so long. He just thought this was. But the Jesuits are sort of Franciscan wannabes. Don't ever tell them that. I think Ignatius of Loyola was a third order Franciscan. And there's a deep Franciscan spirit in Ignatius's spirituality that finding God in all things would be
Yeah.
very characteristic of Francis of Assisi himself. So I think there's a great kinship between Franciscans and Jesuits, and therefore I can, aptly say that Teilhard was himself a closet Franciscan.
I like that. I appreciate that perspective. And yeah, I mean, when you think about it, Franciscan spirituality and Ignatian spirituality are really two of the powerhouses within at least the Catholic universe of ways that we connect. So, what has been so fundamental to your work, and like you touched on even my work, and I'm grateful that we've been able to overlap and connect. Um, so, as we explore this conversation today, evolution has been just so fundamental. And when you approach evolution as a spiritual process, what does that teach you about God?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I was just having a conversation prior to this one, and the question of God came up. And I think when we use that language of God, I think there's a common image that God is a being, or this powerful being who exists over us, in a sense, governing us. You know, I always quip and say, sort of like the Wizard of Oz, but I don't want to be too reductionistic there. But we don't have a sense of God as a living presence, as a dynamic presence of love, as a luminous presence within our midst. And that's something that Francis of Assisi himself, who was not trained in Latin or Neoplatonism and therefore had no idea, sense of moving from the material world to the spiritual world, for him, it was opening up the material world to the spiritual world. That this finding God was precisely in reconciling his own blocks, his own sin, as he would call it, and making every effort to overcome those blocks by coming to terms with his own anger and disappointments, etc., and then opening up to this presence of God within the smallest of creatures, with
Hmm.
birds and the bees and the earthworms and the flowers, and the way he would approach everything in a very sacred, in other words, the God in him recognized the God of the flowers idea. And, while this can seem pantheistic or whatever to some people, Francis wasn't thinking in those terms, and neither was Teilhard de Chardin. I think very similar. I think Teilhard met that God in his own life
Hmm.
first. And I think unless that's what I learn about evolution first. Unless we know that there's a presence within us that's calling us to moreness, to more life, to more being. It's an opening up of life to more life, which is fundamentally, apart from all the mechanisms involved, I think that's what evolution's about. There's an openness to life. Life does not stay as small closed systems or isolated systems, that these systems are constantly kind of feeling the environment and then kind of reorganizing as environment shifts and then opening up to new life when the right time comes. And that's what life's about. It's about life opening up to new life when the right time comes.
Hmm. Yeah, I like how you phrase that. When the right time comes. I think it's a quote from Lao Tzu from the East, where it's nature does not rush, yet everything is accomplished, right? Or nature does not hurry, something to that effect.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that nature is our best teacher. And I think one of the things is Teilhard, I think we can appreciate this. It's a call, he never uses that language of nature explicitly. He uses the language of evolution in the scientific
Hmm.
language. But he's calling us back to Earth, to the whole, the cosmos, very much like Francis of Assisi.
Yeah.
Not that they do this explicitly, it's that they're saying that there's no God apart from this whole that we
Right.
first encounter this God. Yeah.
Yeah, I like how you say they don't do it explicitly because for them it is implicit. There is no separation between creation and God in that way.
Right. They didn't have
Right.
like a creation conference of some sort.
So, Ilya, you speak of this openness to life. In your own life, what gave you the openness or what drew you to explore this relationship between religion and science?
Andrew, that's a really good question that now as I'm getting older, I tend to think about that some more. Because when I started out, first of all, I was one of those type of scientists who had very little time for the humanities, quite
Mm.
honestly. I thought very little of theology. I liked philosophy just a wee bit more. But on the whole, the humanities did not rank high for me at all. It was purely biology, chemistry, physiology, all the sciences. And I really had the idea that, in my teens and early 20s, that science would lead us to the truth. It was this kind of fact-finding mission. Knowledge was increasing through science. So I thought a lot of the humanities, like theology, was a distraction. And then I used to say, how could you possibly study God? you know? Well, God has a sense of humor. So I wound up, in religious life, first a Carmelite monastery, where coming from, I was right on the brink of a postdoc at Johns Hopkins, and I gave that up, literally sent them a letter, and entered this very, very traditional Carmelite monastery. So not unlike a lot of scientists, I had two minds, like the science mind and then this religious mind. So I never even thought about them, interfering or connecting in any way. I literally gave up science to enter into the world of religion. Um, and through, making a long story short, I didn't last in the monastery beyond 4 years, by which I graduated, got
Mhm.
my mon degree, monastic degree. No, not really. It was a little bit too confining for me, and wound up in the Franciscans. And I never wanted to be a theologian. I have to be quite honest. It was about the furthest things from my mind. But I was sort of a cantankerous novice, and I think I drove the sisters rather crazy. So I think I drove the novice director to a brink of some kind of crisis. Anyway, they called me in and asked me if I would like to study spirituality because I had to have a formation as a novice. And I said, well, that just sounds rather fluffy. So I said, well, how about theology? Because I took a theology course in college, and they were like, okay, that's great. So I undertook theology more out of obedience than anything else. Like the superior asked me to do this, okay, I'm going to do this. But then I went to Fordham because I had to go to a Catholic school, and not thinking too much about it. Honestly, I enrolled in. I thought, oh, theology, read a few books, write a paper. Didn't even think it was a serious discipline until I started, of course, started taking graduate courses and loved it. I said I felt like a fish who found water. And I studied with. First, I was in patristics. I actually love the first 500 centuries, of Christianity. Really loved the Greek fathers, the Cappadocian fathers. I wrote my master's thesis on Augustine's rule, and so I was very familiar with that world. I wrote a doctoral question for my doctoral exam on the New Testament phrase "Son of Man," Barnage. So from there, I got my degree at Fordham and didn't know what I was going to do with this master's and doctorate in theology. And the superior said to me one day, well, you're going to have to get a job. And I said, oh, really? About that? Oh my God, I never thought I'd actually have to work with this degree. So she said, probably a teaching job. Well, I never honestly, I had no idea. I wasn't even trained to teach. So, like everyone else, put on an application and got a teaching job at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, teaching science and religion.
Mm.
And I had no idea that this was a whole field. So every week I was, like piles of books reading, trying to catch up on this field of science and religion. And that's basically how I got started. And then I wound up at Washington Theological Union. And while I actually was in charge of the Franciscan intellectual tradition as director of Franciscan studies program there and stuff like that. But another faculty member had a Templeton grant in science and religion, and he said, "Do you want to start a certificate program here?" So we did. So I was involved in science and religion early on, even though it wasn't my intention to do so.
Mhm.
It wasn't like a focus for me, but it seemed like a natural fit, quite honestly, having these degrees, and it just was a natural flow. And then as I think it kind of gelled for me when I got to Georgetown. It was at the Woodstock Theological Center, where we had the whole work was really just in terms of dialogue and projects. So we had projects where we invite really top thinkers, from all different disciplines, and it was great. And then my Jesuit friend John Hoy really was very formative of my thinking, and who's the one who said to me, "You don't have to footnote your ideas. You can just keep, just own your own ideas." And
Yeah.
so we had some of the archives of Teilhard there, and that's where I really began to delve into Teilhard's own writings and stuff like that. So it's been this kind of foray into science and religion wasn't a focus of my, it wasn't an intention of mine from the beginning. It really was a backdoor thing. I literally fell into it through the back door.
Mm.
And, I used to wonder to myself, why did I have spent 13 years in science and I wind up doing theology? And now, after so many years, I can begin to see a wisdom at work here very quietly, kind of leading me in this direction. So it's been amazing.
Well, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that journey in a nutshell. And yeah, you started this interview talking about this openness to life and how essential that is. And you certainly had an openness there to where life was leading you. It really didn't line with where you thought you might go with it or where your desires were in a way. But
Yes.
here you are discovering, oh, this is a field. And then now you are a major contributor to that field. So that's a wonderful thing.
Well, Andrew, this is what I think. I think if you really have, this term, this word God, God is very important to me. So by that, I don't mean in this only like a devotional way. I think there's a presence or power within. I can speak for my own life. And when we are faithful to, in other words, where that becomes the animating center of our lives,
Mm.
everything else finds its way. And that's why I've never held on to anything. I thought the monastery was going to be my life, forever. I thought I loved the Carmelite charism. But after 4 years, I was like, nope, this isn't going to work. So, I was out of there. Then, I'd be at this institution. Nope, that's not going to work. So it's always been kind of you pick up and you move on, but it's not because it's just that I'm paying attention all the time to what I'm
Yeah.
called to. And that's what I think is what is God calling? Each of us has a vocation here. Each of us is created with gifts and a
Mm.
personality and a form to bring those gifts to the world to help shape the world. And that's really what for me has been the shaper of my life is being attentive to that spirit in my life.
I love the way you phrase that. Yeah, being attentive to that shaper, that spirit. So this is a question that I admittedly have some personal stock in, and I'm very curious what your answer is going to be, because this is something I admittedly struggle with myself. But what challenges do you encounter as you attempt to share your perspective, especially on spirituality, theology, religion, with other people?
Well, I think people are coming, we live in this information deluge world, and there's a lot of fears today. This is what I find we're brought up with a certain understanding, for example, of religion, of Catholicism, just as a case in point. That, I know when I was growing up, I wouldn't have even thought about, say, challenging the word God or, redefining Jesus as Savior. That would have been anathema. I mean, my mother would have definitely just grounded me for life. But I hear people's fears a lot of the time.
Mm,
And I think it's coming at new ideas come at people almost like head on, and it can be overwhelming. And one of the reactions is just that they react, they pull back, and they want to defend. Or you might find the atheist or the agnostic saying, "Well, I don't buy that stuff." This is what I think. I think, hey, listen, please hold on to your position because I'm not here to change anyone's mind. I really am not.
mm,
I am here because I am concerned for life, not just my life, but the life that I'm part of, which is, not just God's life, but God's life, my life, as part of the wholeness of life, the wholeness of this human community, this earth community. And so I'm always looking for ideas that are coherent, that can help. In other words, truth I take as sort of an illumination of what's in me is outside me. There's a flowingness in that truth. It draws together and it brings into a greater fullness of life. And when ideas or, there's a resistances, and I'm like, well, okay, I have to, you have to let people be where they are. That's what I've come to. Of course, I'm always trying to convince people that they really should find this way, but I don't. I want people to be at home in how they are thinking through things. And my my experience is the more you try to convince a person against their will, the more they are driven into their own position. And
mm.
so they actually become more adamant in their position. And it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. I mean, we're not going to solve anything this way. And here I look to Francis of Assisi's famous insight, preach by your example, and so we have to be, in a sense, the message that we're trying to convey.
Yeah.
Sometimes words get in the way. They're not the way, they're in the way. And so it's just, okay, just respect, dialogue to the best you can, to be able to listen, to understand, and to respond, and then to let go, you know.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. I appreciate that. And I found in my own experience that when people might approach me about my work with Teilhard, if they're coming from a more traditional Catholic background, I'm sure you've experienced this skepticism,
Oh, yeah.
an air of heresy, right? You've
Oh, yeah.
experienced the whole field of this, I'm sure.
Yeah, right. And
I've,
especially Andrew, just interject here, but I'm sure you got the same thing. But the recent charges of Teilhard with Nazism and eugenics,
yeah,
all that stuff, and I'm like, wow, that is. I mean, I just tried to say, you're looking this on the ground, and you're pulling out these things. But Teilhard was, in a sense, with a broad cosmic view, he was like
yeah,
an aerial lift, looking at the whole surface of things. So
yeah.
two very different perspectives here.
Very, very. Yeah. And what I was going to say was that I've experienced this great affirmation where even if those folks who I engage with some sort of skepticism or I'm responded to with some sort of skepticism at first or some sort of negative sentiment, it's not been uncommon for me to have an encounter with that person, maybe a couple or 3 or 4 years in the future, and them to go, "Hey, I was reading this thing about Teilhard, or I saw this nature documentary, and it made me think about what you said about Teilhard." And they start to put the pieces together. And I appreciate what you just said about letting them be with their own thoughts and work through their own process, because in my mind, that's like evolution at work. That's like that unfolding of complexity and consciousness at work. And here I am as a witness in a way going like, wow, now maybe I even understand Teilhard's thought a little bit better because I've seen a lived example of this evolution in another person in some way.
Exactly. Trust in the slow work of God, right?
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. So you mentioned how folks nowadays are feeling a sense of dread, anxiety, even fear. There's a lot of change in our world, and one of the most rapidly changing things is technology. I think I heard this phrased at one of your Center for Christogenesis conferences a couple of years ago. It's the fastest evolver. And I'm just curious what your perspective is in terms of the role of technology, particularly the new advancements with artificial intelligence within our evolution of consciousness. Do you
Mm.
see it as having the potential to lead it to wholeness, where maybe some risks that take us away from what it is to be truly human? I'm just curious how you're thinking through this at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, good question. I mean, I'm very fascinated by technology because I think certainly it's an extension of ourselves. And so, whenever we're talking about technology, we're talking about ourselves. So I don't see these as two separate things. I'm talking about the human now on a level of extended mind or extended information. Um, but I do think we have allowed the development of technology. For example, I was talking about transhumanism back in 2009, and people looking at me like, that is crazy. Like, we're never going to do that. And then coming back 10 years later and go, whatever you said back then, it's really happening, right? So it's been happening now for quite a while, but we have actually ignored it only until the last, say, 5, 10 years, that
Yeah.
people are now talking about. I was writing on this stuff long before people were really talking about it. So now that we're aware of it, we're frightened to death. And in some ways, rightly so, and in other ways, overly so. I do think technology, first of all, we created it, right? It's not, I mean, up until now, it has not been like a machine creating a machine. It has been a human creating a machine. And the question is why? Why are we creating machines that can mimic human behavior, that can, replace human work, that can think better than a human? What is it about us, that needs to be perfected, or we've just reached the limits, our biological limits, that now we need an artificial extension of these capacities? So I'm very fascinated by that interplay between technology and the human. Second is, I think that religion has been completely marginalized and since abstracted from technology. It's as if, oh, who cares about technology? God will save us. Jesus is here, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I don't know, we're missing the point entirely. Like, what's driving technology may be fundamentally a religious desire, for
Hmm.
something that has not been taking place in religion. So we just ignored that question as well. But now we're at this place today of, on the cusp of quantum computing. The chip war has been accelerating faster, faster, smaller, smaller, more information, more information. It's overwhelming. Now we're in an overwhelming stage. We have too much information. We have the same brains that we had, say, 1,000 years ago, but too much information. People are just lost in a sea of information, and it's very hard to make sense of anything anymore. And I have to say, I do think, it's the type of thing you have to carpe diem. I think the church had an opportunity back in 1965 with Vatican II, to carpe diem, to seize the moment on technology, science, and human becoming. And it kind of didn't. And so now we're at a loss. We're in this spiral of development. Uh, and where are we going? That's the big question. Now, can technology, which way? Where's it going to go? Well, I do think it has the possibility of being putting us in a very difficult position. Now we do have machines that can self-replicate. The open AI stuff is really rather amazing. But when we have self-correcting AI, something else, we've crossed a threshold. We're into something new here, and we don't know how to navigate this. And I don't think we have sufficient theological, philosophical, and ethical reflections. Nor are we drawing on, say, the world's wisdom traditions to create a set of values and ethical boundaries for AI. So it's sort of boundaryless, and it's sort of like the Acela train that's driving at top speed with no conductor. So it can easily go into a brick wall at any time. But I think this problem with AI mirrors the deep disconnect that we have between humans and the wider world of nature, between humans and humans. And we see this even politically in this kind of chaos that we find ourselves in. So I think technology is symptomatic, the kind of fear of technology is symptomatic of something deeply uprooted and disconnected within humanity today. And
Hmm.
that's why never before has it been more vital to reconnect science and religion, to reclaim religion as the depth dimension and the vital dimension of our lives, and to re empower what this word God, or however we want to name this presence of beingness, being in love and compassion, that there's something more here, that we're not the end of our of our work and our desires. We're pulled by something more than us. So it's a complex. We're in a
Hmm.
complex. It's a complex question for a complex time.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I've really only seen approaches to it through like the religious sphere that have been very, very infantilized, like an AI Jesus giving a maybe not a homily, but a sermon or something like that. Um, yeah, I don't think that's an appropriate use of the technology, or at least a very
No,
uh,
I mean, I
yeah.
know Germany has, where Luther posted the 97 Theses, they have the Bless You Too robot. Like you can go, this big robot, and you can go and ask your intentions. You put like a little thing into the robot, like you program, and it'll give you a blessing, like a robot
Wow.
blessing.
I remember when I was teaching high school, this is going back to around like 2013. I remember showing my students a video of it was a robot that was designed to be a Buddhist priest,
Oh yeah.
and it was programmed to conduct funeral ceremonies. Yeah. So,
Yes. So this is what's interesting because so the U.S. or the North America has a real bias because it comes out of our Judeo-Christian tradition, a real fear of this kind of golem, this kind of not golem, I mean this kind of android kind of figure that
right.
fears us. So, but in other cultures like Japan, like Shintoism or Confucianism, where they have a different religious consciousness, robots are actually given sacred status. So
Mm.
you can have a robotic, priest in the temple. But I think I once wrote an article on, robot priests, and a lot of parents wrote to Father Donahue at Villanova. They were really concerned that one of their faculty was advocating for robotic priests. But robotic confession, for example, robot confessions now are also on the rise. You don't have to confess your sins to a priest; you can confess them to a robot. You know.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know that I want to go there just yet. Um, but getting back to these larger themes here that we are so inspired by from Teilhard's thought, he talks about love. Can a robot love? I don't know. That's maybe another conversation for another day. But he talks about love being the lifeblood and the energy of evolution. How do you see love remaining the sustaining force in the world, even though we're experiencing this reality of fragmentation that you've touched on already?
Yeah. So I actually love that part of Teilhard. That central thesis of his that love is the core structure of the universe, or this blood that courses through all cosmic life. For me, that's actually ties very much into the Franciscan tradition. Franciscan metaphysics is based on Bonaventure's notion of a self-diffusive good. So I
Hmm.
take love as the highest good, and that by good I mean the highest possibilities of life itself. And so the self-diffusive goodness of God, or the self-diffusive love, is an infinite fecundity of life itself. And in other words, life is never it cannot be snuffed out, it cannot be exhausted. That the potentials for life are always in our midst. And so I take that love as being an energy of that potential life, that energy that is creative energy, that is constantly seeking to unite with another for more life, that's
Hmm.
unitive energy. And therefore love is that energy of life that is always in the direction of more life. And that's what God is about as well. So I take those two ideas very, they're coterminous or very, very closely aligned. That God is that ever newness of life,
Hmm.
ever newness in love. So as being love as being the core energy of the universe, while that to our modern ears, that just sounds like what a corny idea when you look at the world and it's falling apart. I mean, people killing people, the violence, the opposition, the chaos of our times. How can love possibly be here? And what Teilhard is saying is very much like what Bonaventure and Scotus would say, that it's not on the superficial level that we might be seeing this love, but what's sustaining us amidst the chaos and amidst the violence and opposition is an energy or a reality of love that cannot be quenched or cannot be suffocated by
Hmm.
human foibles, by human sin, by human violence. And that love constantly seeks life from the major explosions of our cosmos to the major extinctions of our earth. That love has been coursing through all levels of life, and yet can be spoken of by another person, another human, to say, I love you. That love is a passion for life. And it says one other thing to me: we're not meant to be alone, that life is unitive, fundamentally, down to the smallest particle of life. That what we are in a sense, we're like little bevels of divine glass, that need one another for that wholeness of God to radiate on this earth. And so I'm a full believer in that reality of love as a core reality of life. And without it, we would be existentially bankrupt. I think we would just dissipate completely.
Yeah, I think we can read about deep history and take into consideration the destruction and creation of star systems and all of the chaos that is implicit within that process. And we can read about history in our country or world history and see these rise and fall of civilizations over time and the turmoil that they go through, both to build up a civilization and then in its collapse. And then we find ourselves in this moment where, like you've touched on earlier, we are so overexposed in a way to all this data, all this information, where it's a burden, but it's also a privilege in a way because we are getting to witness firsthand almost this chaotic process of evolution, of the unfolding of life. And I mean, when you were giving that response, an image that came to mind for me immediately was, I mean, pick your conflict in the world, right? There are aid workers who are there non-politically, just there to help human life, help these people regardless of their race, creed, color, whatever, sustaining life in a way.
Yeah.
And yeah,
No,
I like the way that you described that. With everything falling apart, there's something that sustains that.
actually, I think there's actually more goodness in the world than there is violence. Um, and if you just pay attention, the human person, no matter where they are, they generally want to be good. They want to love. I
Mm.
think we're made for love, and so we want to be there for another. When I was in Chicago in the fall, there were a lot of homeless, along North Sheridan and North Broadway. I mean, every other block there was homeless people asking for money, or a father sitting on the ground with his three small children, asking for money. And I was really struck by that, but I was also struck by the number of people who would go up and say, talk to the person, not just give money, but, ask them how they're doing, or, what else do they need. So we want to do good. We want to love. I do think that that's our deepest fear. I don't think all persons, whether poor or rich, whether whatever color, gender, race, religion, nationality. Love is our deepest reality. And if we could ever build a world that is grounded in that reality, it would be a very, very different world. It would be a world of care. It would be a world of relationality. I think our capitalist system would be rearranged. Monetary flows, shared goods would be rearranged. We have the capacity. I think this is kind of what Jesus had in mind when he was talking about the reign of God idea.
Mhm.
That a new world is possible. And I think where love exists, that new world is possible. Because what you love, you will die for, you will give your life for, and we want to love, but we're not convinced that we should love passionately,
Mm.
that we should give it our all, that we should give our lives away. That's kind of where I think our world gets held back, in its deficiencies and violences.
Yeah, that's a very intriguing thing you mentioned there. It's something that's been on my mind as of late. My baseball coach in high school would often say to a player when he maybe didn't seem like he was exerting his full effort, he would say, "What are you saving it for?"
Exactly.
And it
Yeah.
was usually in the context of a game, right? Because if it's in practice, okay, maybe you're saving it for a game, but in a game, what are you saving it for, right? And
Yeah.
here we are in life, and what are we saving it for? And I challenge myself with that own question when I feel like I'm holding back.
No, I think that's exactly the question, Andrew, because the truth is, our deepest reality together is that each one of us will die, right? So the question is, okay, if death is our truest reality, then what do we live for? You know, do we live simply to, have Starbucks coffee, or, working out at the gym, or, meeting up with my friends. All that's very nice. But ultimately, is that what I live for?
Yeah.
And so it's what drives my life, every moment of every day. And it's as if to say, we act as if we have years to go, like as if, oh gosh, they're having a war in Ukraine. Oh my, Siberia ran out of water, But here where I am, the gym's still going, the lights are on, we're having a great meal this evening, so it all looks content and satisfied. I think Jesus kind of, again says this in the gospel. You're in the field, you know, and the darkness comes, one will be taken, the other left behind. We're not prepared to live with the contingencies of life, which means love is not like an option when everything goes well. Love is the deepest reality, means in this life, I love to the point of tears, as to use Albert Camus' idea, that I give it my all in this life. I may fail, it may not work out, but I have lived from the truth of my own beingness. I have given all that I have in this moment, and that's how we will be remembered. If tonight that my life is taken, will I have loved the best that I can? That's our question.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't know, honestly, the way politics are going, that will remain safe here. And I pray that we do, especially for your young family. But there's no guarantees for
Right.
that.
Yeah. Well, you give me a lot of hope when you paint that image of seeing people encounter the homeless in Washington, D.C. in ways that are contributing, giving them financial assistance, human assistance in terms of conversation. Maybe I know you talk in a recent blog post about witnessing a blessing of a homeless individual. Um, I would think that is you're all witnessing little specks, little pieces of the omega point being put together there. Those are the people that give us hope, right? That are going out there and just picking up trash out of the goodness of their hearts, or going into conflict zones to aid people who are in need.
They're remarkable people today. I mean,
Yeah,
and they're quiet. No one goes around looking for CNN news flashes. People do.
right.
They go about doing good in the world with no big fanfare.
Yeah. And that's so affirming from Teilhard's vision that no matter how small our act, it can be a very intentional part of building up this larger reality of love, this unitive reality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's one love at a time, so to speak.
I like that. I like one love at a time, one step at a time, one love at a time. Yeah. So, Ilya, what challenges you most from Teilhard's vision?
Well, I think, Andrew, that I think Teilhard was a remarkable person in so many ways. I think we'll both agree on that. But he lived within a period of history, and I'm often amazed that he came to the insights he did and the breadth of them, the width of them. But I also think now we have made another turn in consciousness because of technology. I see the world really moving out of the 20th century into a very new paradigm here in the 21st. And so I think the task now is to build on Teilhard's work,
Mm.
not just stay where he was, but I think he would want us as well. I think had he lived long enough, he might have done the same. Which means that I think the next level, and here it becomes, challenging. I think Teilhard stayed, as a Jesuit within the Catholic Church at a very high cost to him and his health, I might add.
Yeah.
But I think it's time now to really challenge institutional religion, and that's hard for us because we love the church, you know, but it can't stay where it is. Institutional religions across the board can't stay where they are. I think the greatest missing piece today is religion. And it's not, like how many times we say, oh, the Sikh conference had thousands of young people there. Well, that's just very nice. I mean, that's beautiful. But it's not just, young people like following Jesus. I mean, it's really developing a thoughtful, preaching, homilies, liturgy, worship, going about the world, everything, has to be reshaped now with a whole kind of cosmotheandric worldview, that God,
Mm.
self, and world are all interweaving. And so this is a challenge now in building this new worldview because we're running up against the limits and the fortresses of institutions, whether
Mm.
it's religious institutions. No, you can only go so far. No, you can't change the doctrine of salvation. No, our Christology will not change, and therefore nothing else is going to change. Or politics. The two systems don't work anymore, but that's okay. We're going to keep them, even though they don't work. you know, so we don't want systemic change. But
Yeah.
we do want systemic change. We want change. We just don't want the systems to change because changing the systems changes our lives. And we don't fundamentally want our lives to change. So I think the great challenge before us, certainly as Teilhardian scholars and as theologians, is we can't stay in these narrow little alleyways of doing theology or remaining church or staying where we are. We're living in a world that really calls for courage,
Mm.
and it calls for vision. Things that Teilhard himself advocated, trust, faith, not only in God, but faith in the world, faith in one another. We don't even have that faith. So these are very challenging times, but I think, honestly, the best times to live because we are on the cusp of a whole new world that's in the making. And we have an opportunity to help shape what this world will become. My fear is that we're going to stay back, and let someone else do it. I don't want to get too involved. I'm kind of involved. I don't want to get too involved. I want to understand science. I don't want to understand too much of science. It's too complicated for me. I like the Pope. I don't want to contradict the Pope. So,
Right.
so if you're gonna like stay in that little hovering space, and you don't want to get too involved, well, we need courageous people. We need
Yeah.
courageous thinkers and courageous doers. And no matter what the cost is, we need courageous lovers. Quite honestly, if you're going to talk about love, well, what does that look like?
Mm.
So there's a lot because there's a lot of unknowns at this point.
Hmm.
We don't know where we're going politically, where we're going institutionally. Um, even the whole educational field is in radical transition.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think in less than 50 years, we're going to see major, major shifts in our world. And we shouldn't fear that. We need to be part of it. That's what I'm saying. We need to be
Right.
part of that shift.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
To really embody that change, embody that evolution, to lean into it.
Lean into it.
It's,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, it seems so simple, but I mean, when we feel
Yeah,
that resistance in life, it's often usually best faced by leaning into it in some way.
exactly.
That's how growth happens. I mean,
Exactly, right? You go with the flow idea, let go, let God,
yeah,
let go, let flow. Easier said sometimes, but that also is a training in letting go. And
yeah,
just to live in the past is over. We only have this moment to make a decision that opens up into what the future becomes. So
yeah,
to be consciously living in this moment,
yeah.
embracing
And
it.
I've noticed for myself too, at least when I have like an immediate guttural no reaction to something or just like feel a resistance to something, that's usually a sign for me to check my ego. Because that's like that first filter barrier that just, yes, no, whatever, good, bad. And it's not a very contemplative approach to it. Doesn't really give you time to sit with it. So sometimes it is a no, after further contemplation, and it's valid, but I've been a bit more patient with myself in that way,
Well,
feeling
it's
the
strange. I
resistance.
mean, the academy is great on, honing the ego, right?
Yeah.
Like you had that idea, really? I mean, or someone once said to me, Teilhard de Chardin. I mean, who would ever spend any time studying him? I do. So thank you very
Well,
much.
you've made a living out of it, right? You've made a career out of it. So, yeah.
But it's just hilarious. I mean, I used to get really annoyed and upset, with scholars and their very highbrow, opinions of things. Now I just think it's funny, I'm like, oh my God, that is hilarious that he actually thinks that. But that's okay, you know.
So, Ilya, you've alluded to this evolution of consciousness leading us to a new paradigm in the way that we are not only seeing the world, but in relationship with the world. You've spoken in your writing and in your speaking about a new axial age that we're entering. And then you have this phenomenon that maybe it has evolved, but maybe not at the same pace. as the rest of the world, this phenomenon of religious life, particularly of like a monasticism. If you were to imagine a new monasticism or a church of the future, what would that look like to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I here's what I think actually with regard to the way I'm interpreting Teilhard's ideas into a new age of consciousness. So the age that, following your cousins and Tom Berry, the age of second axial consciousness. So we're making a new shift to planetary consciousness, which means I think we're moving out of the age of institutional religion
Hmm.
into an age of uh, a broader age of religious expression and sacredness, a wider, more kind of robust idea, which means you find wherever you find God, you find that depth and meaning of life, self, and world idea. So, Church of the Planet is a sense of what holds us together is not whose doctrine of salvation is the right one, but a sense of wholeness, of belonging to a whole, a unity. Like I think that's what the symbol of Omega is about, a kind of a symbolic complexity of mind, heart, and belonging. And so I think this new idea of a second axial religion will require a whole new a new type of person, that Teilhard sort of the Christic, as that again this form that's moving through evolution. So Christified persons, a new depth dimension, which means I think I see religion as more organic rather than institutional. I think of it more and more as a biological phenomenon rather than something that was specially endowed by grace, which means that religious life, I also think, will come to an end as we have known it, because I think religious life, the distinctions between monastic communities and secular communities and clerical communities is very good for the Dionysian age, the Dionysian hierarchies,
Hmm.
but we don't live in that world. We live in a world of complexity. So I would see maybe Omega as a symbol again. So what I like about Omega symbol is that there are maybe circles of of relationships. So we can have maybe one type of person wants to commit their life in a celibate way, or in a core-hearted way, and they can be in living in with other single-minded people, or maybe in relationship with those who have family life, those who are family life but married to their partner who's a woman, or a partner who's a man, or whoever it is that they love. So the question is not like who are you married to. The question is how is your relationship enhancing your life in love. So again, I think our values, or what we're focusing on, needs to shift. We focus on the wrong things and we ask the wrong questions, which lands us into all these partial distinctions of they're right, they're wrong, this is what true religious life is, this is what it isn't. All of
Hmm.
that is so actually disheartening and disconnecting. And so I think religious life should be every life. That's what I think. I think there's no one religion, there's no right religious life. Or, when I was in the convent, a sister would say, "Don't touch me, I'm consecrated." We had this idea like you're holy and you can't be touched. You're inviolate type thing. Um, but we had that, that like Father knows best. Father is like, the next thing to God is Father. There's Jesus in the flesh. We got to get over that stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
that's just
Hmm.
like that's from another era. And that's actually unhelpful to the world we actually live in, because it depreciates the holiness of every single person. Every
Yeah.
single person has that Christ, that is bearing that Christ within them. And so we have a lot of work to do. I think technology is a breeze compared to changing religion today. Religion is the much harder area to shift in, because it's so deeply entrenched in belief systems and myths that we're
Yeah.
pretty sure God, a divine being, put them into place. And that is the most threatening thing to our life on this planet Earth today.
Hmm. Hmm. Very interesting how you phrase that. Yeah, and how some people and cultures have just really dug their heels within religions as systems, not as living traditions that they see themselves a part of in some way. And that's the beauty of Teilhard's vision is he really holds us, he holds the human person within the religious tradition, which is not just his Roman Catholic tradition, but he was, I say it, I know others have said a true Catholic, little c Catholic in terms of being universal, where it has such a larger appeal, universal appeal.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And I think that's what Teilhard was trying to get back to, was the universality of the Christ, where
Right.
it's kind of we're in it together, kids, you
Yeah, and
know.
you mentioned, all life is religious in that way, and how I've just seen some things locally here. I was just being told about some local Catholic, in the Catholic world at least, where I'm coming from. I'm sure there's many other movements across, many other faith systems happening, but just locally here, I was just being told about some local families who are starting to have conversations about maybe buying some land, and it's not just for the sake of farming that land in a regenerative way that's, in harmony with the environment, but you also have families who don't have an interest in farming, but just want to be with other families that have certain, intentions to how they're living their life and whatnot. I think that's one of those examples in a small vignette.
I think that's great. I mean, I love that idea, like local
Yeah.
communities, but rebuilding locally. And then that's, I think, how we can rebuild globally,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
get out of the hyper individualism that we have, really fallen into. Like, you have your house, I have my house. We don't have anything we share together, not even the property between us because I own it to this line and then you own it to that, that
Yeah.
was about ownership and possession and
Right.
privatization of property. And all those things are just fragmenting. They're actually, if you want to talk about anything artificial, that kind of ownership, private ownership, and property possession has created or induced an artificial divide with
Mm.
among us. We
Hmm.
don't see ourselves connected at all, and that's pro, one of our problems today is that even this idea of benevolence is we do for another, but we don't see ourselves connected to that other. We have no fundamental awareness that that other in myself, whether that's a homeless person or, a transgendered person or whoever it is, that we are one together on a fundamental basis of life and certainly within the life of the living presence of God.
Yeah. Very well said. Thank you. So, Ilya, we've been very grateful for your time you've given us today. And as we approach the end of our conversation here, you've shared a lot about your work and about your life, therefore, too, and kind of your own spiritual journey and growth in that way. I'm curious, how do you find synergy with the sacred in your own life?
Well, Andrew, I mean, honestly, I think for me, all life is a prayer, which means I don't find myself like so much setting at times for prayer. I find myself sort of praying my way into life each day. So I think it's growing into an awareness of God at the heart of our lives. However we meet that God or even name that God within us, to know that we're not alone. That there's an I, to use Martin Buber's thing, an I at the center of my thou. And therefore being attentive to that place of omega or the I or the rather the thou that's within me. And I think I do think this what Taylor was about as well. I think prayer is life. I think even if we can, for me, that's what works. That life becomes prayer. I do like times of solitude. I love solitude. I love to walk, and I love nature. So I love just being in nature and just slowing down. And I love trees in particular. I love trees and I love water, the ocean. And those two things speak to me about all that makes life precious. The goodness, the beauty, the aliveness of it, the way trees just kind of hold their own through all the seasons is rather remarkable. And I think I find myself talking to more to nature sometimes than I do to people. There's something there of a communion with with God through nature that is really prayerful for me as well. So I think prayer, is not just setting aside a time of the day, which is, I think, is a good thing to do. We still say the little hours, when we're
Hmm. Hmm.
in our community. I like the liturgy. I like praying together, by the way. There's
Hmm.
something about communal prayer that is life giving. It's hearing those words of the Psalms out loud and then in that common voice together. There's something about that that is enriching and powerful. Um, but prayer, to me, prayer is the heart of life. So I place that as a high priority. However, that deep dialogue with God.
Yeah, and like you say, you just kind of find yourself praying your way into the day. Your response about how implicit it is for you makes me think of a homily that was given by the late Norbertine priest, Father Andrew Safferny, who I know you're familiar with. And admittedly, I was a part of his journey falling into the Teilhard world toward the end of his life. He was reading your books and he was telling me how he's watching your YouTube videos and he's reading Kathy Duffy's books and John Haught, and he couldn't get enough of it. It was just really expanding his sense of the sacred. And he gave this homily where he talked about how neural pathways in our brain are, for lack of a better analogy, are like ski slopes, where it's just a
Hmm.
virgin powder slope where there's no tracks in that snow yet. And then the more we are exposed to something or do something, or we fall into those rhythms and habits of life, we ingrain those tracks in the snow deeper and deeper, and then we just find ourselves naturally falling into those tracks. But this process of neurogenesis is when we are able to develop new ways, new tracks down the mountain, so to speak, in the fresh snow. And he spoke of that expansion of his way of seeing things, of his own neurogenesis in terms of being able to craft those pathways, sacred pathways, where you're just learning to see the world that way. And I just thought, wow, that's awesome. This guy just put it so wonderfully.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible, which means it doesn't matter how old you are or how fixed you are in any tradition. When we are remain open to seeking God, new
Mm,
pathways will open up,
yeah,
and we have to
yeah.
just follow those pathways. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, Ilya, again, thank you so much for all the time that you've given us today and the wonderful insight that you've just showered us with. So, as we get ready to wrap up here, I'd like to just give you an opportunity to tell us how people can find more about you and your work. And you mentioned a new book you have coming up, The Christian Mutation. If you want to share anything about that or anything else you have coming up.
Yeah, thanks. So you can find the heart of my work is at the Center for Christogenesis.org, which is the website that I founded. I do have all my books now are at Orbis Books. So if you go to Orbis Books, you'll find them all. And then I just finished a book called The Christian Mutation: The Dynamic God of Jesus in a World of Becoming, which basically asks the question, when we say in the Creed, I believe in one God, what is the oneness of God we believe in? So it's a question of Christian monotheism, and where that might sit in relation to other monotheistic faiths, how monotheism has been changing with the rise of modern science. As what I look through from the tradition into process theology, and then try to locate or situate Teilhard de Chardin within the broader Catholic intellectual tradition, and then uh, also within the emergence of process theology. Where does Teilhard fit here? And what is his unique contribution? And why I think he may be the best articulator for Catholicity in the 21st century. So, all wrapped up there in the Christian Mutation. Hopefully, will be out this summer from Orbis Books.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Well, you give us plenty to look forward to, not just in terms of your work, but in terms of the larger future and having a hope for, a more unitive world. And I think I'll just kind of, wrap it up with your quote from earlier. We just do this one love at a time.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen. So, Ilya, thank you so much. And we'll look forward to the next time that we can connect and look forward to all your good work. And thank you so much for that.
Super. Thanks a lot. All right. Blessings.